The amber light from the restaurant's pendant lamps catches in the condensation on my beer glass, and I watch the droplets slide down while Sarah from accounting tells some story about her weekend that I'm only half listening to. The noise of the happy hour crowd presses in around us. Laughter, clinking glasses, the scrape of chairs against hardwood floors. It's Thursday, which means most of us will drag ourselves through Friday morning, nursing mild headaches, and promising ourselves we'll skip next week's gathering. We never do. I take a sip of my drink and let my eyes drift across the table to where Adrian sits, one elbow propped casually against the back of his chair. He's listening to Marcus describe some client disaster with that focused attention he gives everyone, like whatever they're saying is the most important thing in the world. There's something about the way Adrian tilts his head when he's really listening that makes my chest do this small, traitorous thing I've learned to ignore. The conversation shifts, as it always does after the second round, to office gossip. Who's dating whom? Who got promoted? Who's looking for a new job? Sarah leans forward with that conspiratorial gleam in her eye that means she's about to say something she probably shouldn't. So who here has an office crush? She asks, drawing out the word crush like she's savoring it. The table erupts in the kind of laughter that happens when alcohol has loosened everyone's tongues just enough. Marcus immediately points to Jennifer from HR, claiming she's been flirting with the new guy in IT. Jennifer throws a cocktail napkin at him. Someone else mentions the obvious tension between two of the senior partners. The game gains momentum, and I find myself caught up in it despite myself. When the attention turns to me, I don't think. I just speak. Oh, that's easy, I say, gesturing with my beer toward Adrian. It's Adrian Cho. The words hang in the air for a moment before the table explodes into delighted chaos. Someone whoops. Sarah claps her hands. Marcus makes some joke about keeping it professional that gets lost in the noise. I feel heat creep up my neck, but I force myself to grin like it's all just harmless fun. Like I haven't just said something that feels both completely honest and utterly reckless. Adrian laughs. That's the thing I notice first. He laughs in that low, easy way he always does when someone puts him on the spot. His eyes crinkle at the corners, and he shakes his head like he can't believe I've just thrown him under the bus. But there's something else there too. Something in the way his gaze meets mine across the table. Warm, but unreadable. Like he's trying to solve a puzzle he didn't know existed until this moment. The conversation moves on, as conversations do. Someone orders another round. Marcus starts telling a story about his weekend that involves a kayak and what sounds like a minor medical emergency. The moment passes, filed away under harmless office banter, the kind of thing we'll all probably forget by Monday morning. But then Jennifer, emboldened by wine and the general atmosphere of oversharing, decides to play the game again. Okay, but seriously, she says, pointing a slightly unsteady finger around the table. If we're being real about office crushes, mine is totally Adrian. The words hit the table like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread outward in a silence that feels suddenly heavy, deliberate. I watch Adrian's face change, not dramatically, not in any way that someone who doesn't know him would notice. But I've spent enough lunch hours studying the subtle shifts in his expression to catch the way his smile falters, just slightly. The way his eyes go distant. The way his fingers tighten around his glass. He doesn't laugh this time. Instead, he stares down at his drink, lips pressed into something that isn't quite a smile, isn't quite a frown. Just a careful line that says nothing and everything at once. The silence stretches long enough that someone, I think it's Marcus, clears his throat and makes some joke about the music being too loud, and gradually the conversation rebuilds itself around safer topics. But I can't stop watching Adrian. The way he's gone quiet, not withdrawn exactly, but inward, like he's turned down the volume on himself, become careful in a way that feels protective. When someone asks him a direct question about the campaign he's working on, he answers with the kind of professional politeness he usually reserves for clients he doesn't like. I want to say something, but I don't know what. I want to catch his eye, but he's looking everywhere except at me. There's a knot forming in my stomach, tight and uncomfortable, like I've broken something I didn't even know was fragile. The evening winds down earlier than usual. People check their phones, mention early meetings, gather their coats with the kind of enthusiasm that suggests the spell has been broken. Adrian is one of the first to leave, slipping away with a general goodbye to the table and a brief wave in my direction that feels polite rather than personal. I stay longer than I should, nursing the last of my beer and half listening to Sarah and Marcus debate the merits of various dating apps. But my mind keeps circling back to that moment when the air changed, when Adrian's face closed off like shutters being drawn. I keep thinking about the difference between his first laugh and his silence. About the careful way he held himself after Jennifer spoke, like he was trying to take up less space at the table. When I finally leave, the night air hits me with a clarity that makes me realize I'm slightly more drunk than I thought. The walk to the subway is only 6 blocks, but it feels longer tonight, each step echoing off the empty sidewalks. The city moves around me with its usual late evening rhythm. People heading home from restaurants, couples walking arm in arm, the distant hum of traffic on the main avenue. I think about Adrian walking these same streets, probably taking the 6 train back to his apartment in Murray Hill. I wonder if he's thinking about tonight, or if he's already filed it away under office weirdness and moved on to weekend plans or work deadlines or whatever it is Adrian thinks about when he's alone. But something tells me he's not moving on quite so easily. Something about the way he went quiet, the way that silence felt deliberate rather than uncomfortable. Like he was protecting something, or hiding something, or both. I've known Adrian for a year now, ever since he started at the company with that easy confidence that made him fit in immediately while somehow standing apart. We fell into friendship the way some people do at work, shared lunches, late brainstorming sessions that turned into conversations about music and books and the kinds of small philosophies that make up a person. I've always been careful not to read too much into it, to keep things in that safe space of professional camaraderie with just enough personal connection to make the days more interesting. But tonight feels different. Tonight feels like something shifted, like a door opened that neither of us was expecting to find. And I can't shake the feeling that my joke wasn't really a joke at all, and that Adrian's silence means he knows it. The train is nearly empty at this hour, just me and a few other late commuters swaying gently as we speed through the tunnels beneath the city. I close my eyes and let the rhythm of the rails carry me toward home, toward sleep, toward whatever comes next. But even with my eyes closed, I can still see Adrian's face in that moment when the laughter died. Careful, thoughtful, and suddenly very real. I've been at Morrison & Associates for 5 years now, which in marketing terms makes me practically a lifer. The office occupies 3 floors of a converted warehouse in Tribeca, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures that are supposed to make us feel creative and dynamic. Most days it just makes me feel like I'm working in an expensive restaurant that forgot to serve food. My desk sits in the northeast corner, positioned so I can see both the elevator and the coffee station. It's a strategic location I claimed after my second promotion, when I finally had enough seniority to stop pretending I didn't care about office politics. From here I can track the daily rhythms of the place. Who arrives late, who takes long lunches, who stays past 7 trying to impress the partners. I've made myself useful by being the person who knows everyone's coffee order and remembers birthdays, the one who can diffuse tension with the right joke at the right moment. My colleagues would probably describe me as reliable, witty, if they're being generous. I hit my deadlines, volunteer for the projects no one else wants, and maintain what I think of as professional optimism even when clients make requests that would make a saint consider violence. I keep my personal life carefully compartmentalized, offering just enough details to seem normal without inviting follow-up questions. Weekend plans are always described as quiet, dating life as complicated, family as supportive but distant. It's a persona I've cultivated carefully over the years, this version of myself that fits seamlessly into office culture without revealing too much of what lies underneath. I learned early in my career that workplace friendships require a certain kind of performance, a shared understanding that we're all playing roles that make 40 hours a week bearable for everyone involved. Adrian changed that calculus without even trying. He arrived on a Tuesday morning last spring, introduced by Caroline, one of the senior partners, as our new creative director. I remember watching him shake hands around the office, taking in names and faces with the kind of focused attention that suggested he actually cared about getting them right. He was wearing dark jeans and a gray sweater that looked expensive without being showy, his hair slightly messy in a way that seemed deliberate. When Caroline brought him over to my corner of the floor, he extended his hand with a smile that reached his eyes. "Elliot, right?" he said. "Caroline mentioned you're the one who keeps this place running." It was a small thing, but I noticed that he used my name immediately, like he'd already committed it to memory. Most new hires take weeks to get everyone straight, referring to colleagues by vague descriptions or job titles until the names finally stick. Adrian made it seem effortless. Within a month, he'd established himself as someone people genuinely wanted to work with. Not just because he was good at his job, though he was, bringing a fresh perspective to campaigns that had been growing stale, but because he possessed that rare quality of making everyone around him feel more interesting. He asked questions that showed he'd been listening. He remembered details from conversations that happened weeks earlier. He had opinions about music and books and food that sparked the kind of debates that made late nights at the office feel less like punishment. Our friendship developed gradually, the way the best ones do. It started with practical things. I knew which food trucks had the shortest lines. He knew which coffee shop made the strongest espresso. We began taking lunch breaks together, walking to the cart across the street that served Vietnamese sandwiches, finding a bench in the small park nearby when the weather was decent. Those conversations revealed someone more complex than his easy charm initially suggested. Adrian had grown up in San Francisco, studied design at Art Center, worked at a few agencies in Los Angeles before deciding he needed a change of scenery. He talked about his family with the kind of affection that comes with comfortable distance, loving them while acknowledging they didn't quite understand his choices. His parents wanted him to be a doctor or lawyer, something with clear markers of success they could explain to their friends. Creative director at a boutique marketing firm didn't translate as easily. I found myself looking forward to those lunch breaks in a way that felt both natural and slightly dangerous. Adrian had a way of asking questions that made me want to give real answers, to drop the careful professional persona I'd spent years perfecting. He wanted to know what I did before marketing, why I'd chosen New York, what I actually thought about the campaigns we worked on instead of the diplomatic responses I offered in meetings. Gradually, our conversations extended beyond the lunch hour. We stayed late to brainstorm campaign concepts, ordering takeout and spreading ideas across the conference room table while the office emptied around us. Adrian would pull up playlists on his laptop, introducing me to artists I'd never heard of, explaining why certain songs reminded him of specific color palettes or design concepts. I started sharing playlists in return, surprised by how much you could learn about someone from the music they chose to share. The running joke about my office crush began innocently enough. Someone would mention Adrian's latest campaign, and I'd make some comment about his creative genius. When he'd suggest a restaurant for the team lunch, I'd joke about trusting his judgment implicitly. It became a kind of performance, this exaggerated appreciation that everyone could recognize as harmless fun. Except it wasn't entirely harmless, and it certainly wasn't entirely fun. Somewhere in those months of shared lunches and late-night brainstorming sessions, my appreciation for Adrian's professional skills had evolved into something more personal. I found myself noticing things that had nothing to do with work, the way he concentrated when he was sketching, tongue slightly visible between his teeth. The way he laughed at his own jokes before telling them, like he couldn't contain his amusement. The way he listened to music, eyes closed, completely absorbed in whatever he was hearing. I told myself it was a workplace crush in the most literal sense, the kind of attraction that develops when you spend too much time with someone interesting and unavailable. Something to acknowledge privately and manage carefully, like any other inconvenient feeling that had no place in professional settings. Until Thursday night, when Adrian's reaction to Jennifer's comment cracked something open that I hadn't realized was keeping us both carefully contained. Friday morning arrives with the kind of gray sky that makes everyone in the office move a little slower, clutching their coffee cups like talismans against the approaching weekend. I'm reviewing campaign metrics when I notice Adrian hovering near my desk, not quite approaching, but not walking away either. He's holding a manila folder against his chest, shifting his weight from one foot to the other in a way that's completely unlike his usual confident stride. I look up from my screen and catch his eye. Everything okay? He glances around the office, taking in the morning bustle of people settling into their desks, checking emails, preparing for the day ahead. When his gaze returns to me, there's something different in his expression. Uncertain, maybe. Vulnerable in a way I've never seen before. Want to grab lunch? He asks. Just us. The phrase hangs between us with a weight that seems disproportionate to such a simple question. We've eaten lunch together dozens of times, but something about the way he says it, the deliberate emphasis on just us, makes it feel like more than a casual invitation. Of course, I tell him. The usual place? He shakes his head. I was thinking somewhere quieter. There's a noodle shop on Spring Street I've been wanting to try. The morning passes with unusual tension. I catch myself watching Adrian from my peripheral vision, noting the way he seems more focused on his work than usual, like he's using the familiar tasks to avoid thinking about whatever he wants to discuss at lunch. When noon arrives, we leave the office separately, meeting at the corner of Spring and Lafayette without discussing the logistics. It feels like the kind of careful choreography people use when they're trying not to draw attention to themselves. The noodle shop is small and warm, filled with the kind of ambient noise that makes private conversations possible. We order quickly, pho for him, ramen for me, and find a table near the back, away from the window and the foot traffic outside. Adrian fidgets with his chopsticks, arranging them parallel to his bowl, then perpendicular, then parallel again. The silence stretches until our food arrives, giving us the excuse of eating to avoid whatever conversation he's been building up to. But halfway through my bowl, Adrian sets down his spoon and looks directly at me for the first time since we sat down. You were joking the other night, right? About me being your crush? The question catches me completely off guard. I've spent the past day trying not to think about Thursday night, filing it away under awkward office moments that are best forgotten. But the way Adrian asks it, quiet and serious, makes it impossible to dismiss. I set down my own chopsticks, buying time while I try to figure out how to answer. The truth feels too big for this small restaurant, too complicated for a lunch conversation between colleagues who have to work together every day regardless of what I say next. I finally manage, kind of. Maybe not entirely. It's the most honest answer I can give without completely exposing myself, but it's also completely inadequate. Adrian studies my face like he's trying to decode something written in a language he's still learning. What does that mean? He asks. I look down at my bowl, watching steam rise from the broth while I try to find words that won't make everything worse. The restaurant continues its quiet bustle around us, other conversations providing a soundtrack to our careful navigation of territory neither of us expected to explore. It means, I say slowly, that it started as a joke. But somewhere along the way it stopped being funny and started being true. Adrian doesn't respond immediately. When I look up, he's staring at his hands, wrapped around his water glass. His cheeks have taken on a slight flush that could be from the heat of the soup, but somehow feels like more than that. It's weird, he says finally. I didn't think I'd care if people said stuff like that. It's just office gossip, right? People talk. He pauses, and I wait, sensing there's more he needs to say. But when Jennifer said it, when someone else claimed the same thing you'd been joking about, he trails off, shaking his head. I hated it. I hated hearing it from someone else. And I couldn't figure out why. The air between us has changed completely now, thick with possibility that neither of us saw coming when we walked in here 20 minutes ago. The careful professional distance we've maintained for over a year suddenly feels artificial, like a costume we've been wearing that no longer fits properly. I think I know why. I tell him, and my voice comes out quieter than I intended. Adrian looks up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time since he asked his question. There's something raw in his expression, a vulnerability that makes him look younger and older simultaneously. Like he stripped away some protective layer he didn't realize he'd been carrying. Yeah? He asks. Because it matters who says it, I reply. Because context changes everything. Because when I say it, even as a joke, there's something real underneath it. And when someone else says it, it just sounds like noise. We sit with that admission for a moment, letting it settle between us like sediment in still water. The restaurant continues around us, but we've created our own small bubble of honesty that feels both fragile and essential. Adrian reaches across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close enough that I can feel the warmth of his fingers near mine. I need you to know, he says, that I didn't laugh because I didn't like it. I laughed because I didn't know what to do with it. Because I wasn't ready for it to mean something. And now? I ask. Now I think I might be ready, he says. Or at least ready to figure out what it means together. The admission hangs between us like a bridge neither of us is quite prepared to cross, but both of us can see clearly for the first time. When we leave the restaurant an hour later, walking slowly back toward the office, the city looks different somehow. The same streets, the same buildings, but illuminated by the possibility of something neither of us had allowed ourselves to imagine just hours before. The week after our lunch conversation moves differently than the weeks before it. Not dramatically, not in any way that would be obvious to our colleagues. But there's a subtle shift in the rhythm of our interactions that I feel in my chest every time Adrian walks past my desk. It starts with text messages. Before, our communication outside of work had been limited to the occasional group chat or logistical questions about lunch plans. Now, Adrian sends me a photo of a street musician in Washington Square Park on his way home Monday evening. "Just thought you'd like this," he writes. The musician is playing violin, and something about the golden hour light filtering through the trees behind him makes the whole scene look like a painting. I find myself staring at the image longer than necessary, not because of the music or the lighting, but because Adrian thought of me when he saw it. Because he wanted to share this small moment of beauty with me specifically. I text back, "Beautiful. Thanks for sharing." Then delete it and write, "This is lovely." Then delete that too and settle on, "Made my evening better." Tuesday brings a longer exchange about the podcast he mentioned over Vietnamese sandwiches 3 months ago, the one about design history that I finally started listening to on his recommendation. We dissect the episode about Bauhaus typography with the kind of intensity usually reserved for campaign strategy, our messages growing longer and more detailed as the evening stretches on. By Wednesday, we're texting past midnight, conversations that begin with work-related observations and spiral into discussions about music we loved in college, books that changed how we see the world, fears we've never admitted to anyone else. I tell him about the anxiety that keeps me awake some nights, the worry that I've built a life that looks successful from the outside but feels hollow at its center. He admits that he moved to New York partly to escape the weight of his family's expectations, that sometimes he feels like he's performing a version of himself rather than actually living. These conversations feel dangerous in the best possible way, like standing at the edge of something high and beautiful and terrifying all at once. At work, our dynamic shifts in ways that are harder to quantify, but impossible to ignore. Meetings feel charged with an undercurrent of awareness that wasn't there before. When Adrian presents campaign concepts, I catch myself watching his hands as he gestures, noticing the way he pushes his hair back when he's thinking through a problem. When I offer feedback or build on his ideas, I can feel his attention on me like a physical presence, focused and intent in a way that makes my skin warm. I start noticing that he lingers at my desk more often, finding excuses to discuss projects that don't really require face-to-face conversation. He'll perch on the edge of my desk while I finish an email, close enough that I can smell his cologne, subtle and woody and completely distracting. Sometimes I look up to find him watching me with an expression I can't quite read, thoughtful and soft, and something else that makes my breath catch. The change isn't lost on me, but it's not lost on him either. I catch him observing me sometimes, not in passing but lingering, like he's trying to memorize something or solve a puzzle that's been bothering him. When our eyes meet across the conference room during presentations, there's a split second of connection that feels electric before one of us looks away. Thursday evening finds us working late again, but this time the overtime feels less like obligation and more like opportunity. Caroline left hours ago for her book club, and gradually the office has emptied until it's just us and the cleaning crew. We've ordered Vietnamese sandwiches from our usual place and spread campaign materials across the conference room table. But the work feels secondary to the simple pleasure of being alone together in the quiet office. Adrian has taken off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, and I find myself distracted by the way his forearms look in the fluorescent light. He's sketching mock-up layouts by hand, something he does when he wants to think through concepts without the interference of software, and there's something mesmerizing about watching his ideas take shape on paper. We've been working in comfortable silence for nearly an hour when Adrian looks up from his sketching and catches me watching him. "What?" he asks, but he's smiling in a way that suggests he doesn't mind being observed. "Nothing," I say, but I don't look away. Just thinking. About how different this feels from last week. About how I used to think I was good at reading people, and now I'm not sure I understand anything that's happening between us. Adrian sets down his pen and leans back in his chair, studying my face in the warm light from the desk lamp we've positioned between us. "What do you think is happening between us?" he asks. The question hangs in the air like a challenge, like an invitation, like the most important test I've ever been asked to take. I could deflect, make another joke, retreat into the safety of professional distance. Instead, I find myself speaking the truth. I think we're discovering that the line between friendship and something else isn't as clear as we thought it was, I tell him. I think we're both trying to figure out what that means. Adrian nods slowly, like I've articulated something he's been thinking but hadn't found words for yet. And what do you think it means? He asks. I think it means we've been careful for a long time, and maybe we don't need to be so careful anymore. The admission sits between us like a bridge neither of us is quite ready to cross, but both of us can see clearly for the first time. Adrian reaches across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close enough that I can feel the warmth radiating from his skin. I'd like that, he says quietly. Not being so careful. Seeing what happens if we stop editing ourselves around each other. When we finally pack up our materials and leave the office, the October evening has turned crisp and clear. Adrian suggests we walk instead of immediately heading to our respective subway stops, and we find ourselves wandering through the quiet streets of Tribeca, past restaurants with warm lights spilling from their windows and couples walking arm in arm. Our conversation flows naturally from work to music to the random observations that occur when you're moving through a city at night. Adrian points out architectural details I've never noticed, the way different buildings from the same era share similar ironwork or window treatments. I share stories about the neighborhoods we pass through, small bits of New York history I've accumulated over the years of living here. Somewhere near Canal Street, Adrian stops walking and turns to face me. The streetlight above us casts shadows that make his features look more defined, more serious than usual. This is different, isn't it? He says. What we're doing now. It's not the same as before. I look at him, taking in the uncertainty in his expression, the way he's holding himself like he's not sure what my answer will be, but needs to ask the question anyway. Yes, I tell him. It's different. Good different or complicated different? He asks. Both, I admit. Definitely both. He smiles then, the first completely unguarded expression I've seen from him since our lunch conversation. It transforms his whole face, makes him look younger and more vulnerable and absolutely beautiful under the amber glow of the street lamp. I can live with both, he says. We walk back toward the subway in comfortable silence, and when we reach the platform where our lines diverge, Adrian hesitates before heading toward his train. I'll see you tomorrow, he says, but it sounds like a question. See you tomorrow, I confirm, and something in the way I say it makes him smile again. I watch him disappear down the corridor toward the 6th train, and only then do I realize that the careful professional distance we've maintained for over a year has dissolved completely. We're in uncharted territory now, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, that feels like exactly where I want to be. The knock on my apartment door comes at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening. 3 quick raps that somehow manage to sound both hesitant and urgent. I'm not expecting anyone, and my first thought is that it's probably my neighbor Mrs. Chun with another package that was delivered to the wrong address. But when I look through the peephole, I see Adrian standing in the hallway, still wearing his work clothes, but looking somehow disheveled, like he's been running his hands through his hair. I open the door, and he looks at me with an expression I can't immediately read. Not upset exactly, but unsettled in a way that makes me step aside without asking questions. Sorry for just showing up, he says, stepping into my small entryway. I was in the neighborhood, and I didn't want to go home yet. It's a lie, and we both know it. Adrian lives in Murray Hill, which is definitely not in the neighborhood of my West Village studio. But I don't call him on it because there's something in his posture that suggests he needs this to be casual, needs the pretense that this is a spontaneous visit rather than something he's been building up the courage to do. Rough day? I ask, closing the door behind him. He shrugs, looking around my apartment like he's seeing it for the first time, even though he's been here before for the occasional work session when the office got too chaotic. Tonight his gaze seems to take in details he missed before. The stack of books on my coffee table, the framed photograph of my parents on the bookshelf, the guitar leaning against the wall that I bought with good intentions and rarely play. Something like that, he says. Mind if I just sit for a while? I gesture toward the couch, a second-hand find that's more comfortable than it looks. Adrian settles into one corner, and I take the other end, leaving space between us that feels both respectful and charged with possibility. He's holding himself with that careful control I've noticed he uses when something is bothering him, like he's trying to contain whatever he's feeling until he can figure out how to articulate it. I don't push. Instead, I ask if he wants something to drink, and when he shakes his head, I settle back into the cushions and wait. Outside, the city continues its evening rhythm. Distant sirens, the rumble of the subway beneath the street, voices from the sidewalk below, filtering up through my windows. The silence stretches for several minutes, but it doesn't feel uncomfortable. It feels like the kind of quiet that exists between people who trust each other enough not to fill every moment with conversation. Adrian stares at his hands, turning them over like he's studying the lines on his palms, and I watch him work through whatever internal process has brought him to my door. Finally, he speaks without looking up. "We lost the Morrison account today," he says. I sit up straighter. Morrison is one of our biggest clients, a contract that represents nearly 20% of the agency's annual revenue. Losing them would mean layoffs, restructuring, the kind of upheaval that makes everyone start updating their resumes. "What happened?" I ask. Adrian shakes his head. "It wasn't performance. The campaign we pitched last month tested better than anything they'd run in 2 years. But they're consolidating their marketing spend, moving everything in-house. Corporate decision, nothing we could have prevented." He looks up at me then, and I can see the frustration in his expression, the particular kind of helplessness that comes from doing everything right and still losing. "Caroline called an emergency meeting at 5, he continues. Laid out the numbers, explained what this means for staffing. She's trying to be optimistic, talking about new business development and tightening budgets, but we all know what's coming." I feel a knot form in my stomach, not just for the agency, but for what this might mean for us. The careful balance we've been building over the past few weeks suddenly feels fragile, threatened by circumstances completely outside our control. "I'm sorry," I tell him. "I know how much you cared about that campaign." Adrian nods, but I can tell there's more he's not saying. The loss of a major client would be upsetting for anyone, but there's something else in his demeanor, something more personal than professional disappointment. "It's not just the account," he says eventually. "It's everything. The timing, the uncertainty, the way it makes me question what I'm doing here, whether any of this matters." He gestures vaguely, encompassing not just my apartment, but the larger question of his life in New York, his career, the choices that brought him here. And then I started thinking about what happens if I have to find another job, if I end up somewhere else. About all the things I've been putting off because I thought I had time to figure them out gradually. The admission hangs between us, and I understand now why he's here, why he couldn't go home to his empty apartment with these questions spiraling through his mind. "You're talking about us," I say, "about what's been happening between us." Adrian looks at me directly for the first time since he arrived, and the vulnerability in his expression is almost overwhelming. "I didn't laugh that night at the bar because I didn't like what you said," he tells me, his voice quiet but steady. "I laughed because I had no idea what to do with how much I did like it. Because I wasn't ready to want something that felt so complicated." He shifts on the couch, angling his body toward mine. "But when Jennifer said the same thing, when someone else claimed what you'd been joking about, I realized it wasn't a joke anymore. At least not for me. I realized I hated hearing it from someone else because it mattered who was saying it. Because when you said it, even as a joke, it felt like possibility. And when she said it, it just felt like noise." The honesty in his voice undoes something in my chest, some protective mechanism I've been using to keep this situation manageable and safe. "Adrian," I start, but he holds up a hand. "I need to finish this," he says. "Today, thinking about everything that might change, I realized I don't want to keep pretending this is just friendship. I don't want to keep wondering what would happen if we stopped being so careful with each other." He reaches across the space between us then, not quite touching my hand, but close enough that I can feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "I want to find out what this is," he says. "What we could be if we stopped being afraid of it." The words settle between us like a bridge finally completed after months of careful construction. I look at his face, taking in the hope and fear warring in his expression, the way he's holding his breath waiting for my response. Instead of speaking, I close the distance between us, leaning forward until our foreheads are almost touching. Adrian's eyes flutter closed, and when I kiss him, soft and tentative and questioning, he kisses me back with a certainty that surprises us both. It's nothing like I imagined it would be, and everything like I hoped. Gentle but sure, familiar but completely new. When we finally separate, Adrian's hand is cupped against my cheek, and he's looking at me like he's trying to memorize this moment. He starts, then stops, shaking his head with a smile that transforms his entire face. Yeah, I agree, even though he hasn't finished the sentence. It was, Wednesday morning arrives with the weight of everything unsaid. I wake up in my own bed, alone, but with the memory of Adrian's kiss still lingering on my lips like a secret I'm not sure how to carry. He left around midnight, after we spent 2 hours on my couch talking in the careful, exploratory way of people who have just crossed a line they can't uncross. We didn't make plans. We didn't define what happened between us. We just agreed that we both needed to sleep on it, to see how it felt in the daylight. The walk to work feels longer than usual, each step measured against the knowledge that everything is different now. I find myself rehearsing conversations that might happen, imagining scenarios that range from awkward to wonderful to catastrophic. By the time I reach the office, I've convinced myself that Adrian will either pretend last night never happened or greet me with the kind of professional distance that makes it clear he's having second thoughts. Instead, when I step off the elevator, he's waiting by my desk with 2 cups of coffee from the good place around the corner, the one we discovered during our lunch explorations. He hands me one without ceremony, his fingers brushing mine briefly in the exchange, and I feel something settle in my chest that I didn't realize had been tightly wound since I woke up. Thank you, I say, and he nods like this is the most normal thing in the world, like bringing me expensive coffee is something he's always done. The morning proceeds with a careful normalcy that feels both reassuring and surreal. We attend a strategy meeting where Caroline updates everyone on the Morrison situation, explaining the timeline for finding new clients and the belt-tightening measures that will be necessary in the interim. I catch Adrian's eye across the conference table when she mentions the possibility of reduced headcount, and something passes between us that acknowledges both the professional concern and the personal stakes we now have in each other's continued employment. But as the day progresses, reality begins to intrude in ways neither of us anticipated. During lunch, while Adrian and I sit at our usual spot in the small park, Jennifer from HR stops by our bench to discuss some scheduling conflict with the creative team. Her presence transforms our easy conversation into something stilted and professional, and I realize how much our dynamic has shifted when we have to perform normalcy for an audience. After she leaves, Adrian stares at his sandwich without eating it. This is going to be complicated, isn't it? He says. I follow his gaze around the park, taking in the other office workers scattered across benches and patches of grass, many of them colleagues from our building or the surrounding offices. The urban professional ecosystem that felt so comfortable yesterday now seems full of potential observers, people who might notice if we sit too close or talk too intimately or look at each other the way we looked at each other last night. HR policies, I say. Office gossip. The risk of everything becoming public before we even know what this is. Adrian nods, still focused on his untouched lunch. I can see him working through the same calculations I've been running since I woke up. The professional hazards of dating a colleague, the way workplace relationships become everyone's business whether you want them to or not, the particular vulnerability of being gay men in an environment that likes to think of itself as progressive but still operates on assumptions about what constitutes appropriate office behavior. What if we kept it quiet? He suggests. Boundaries at work, private life separate. People don't have to know until we figure out what we want them to know. It sounds reasonable when he says it, the kind of mature compromise that acknowledges reality while protecting what we've started to build. But something about the suggestion sits wrong with me, like a solution that solves the immediate problem while creating a dozen smaller ones. The afternoon brings a new wrinkle when Marcus stops by our area of the office to discuss a campaign concept, and his casual banter suddenly feels loaded with potential implications. He makes some joke about office crushes, clearly referencing the conversation from last week's happy hour, and I watch Adrian's face carefully compose itself into an expression of amused detachment that doesn't reach his eyes. After Marcus leaves, we work in silence for nearly an hour, the easy camaraderie of yesterday replaced by a careful politeness that feels like a step backward from everything we discovered on my couch. By Thursday, the weight of what we're not discussing has become its own presence between us. We eat lunch separately, claiming conflicting meetings that don't actually exist. Our text conversations, which had been growing longer and more intimate each night, dwindled to logistical exchanges about work projects. When we do interact in professional settings, there's a hyper-awareness in both of us that makes every gesture feel choreographed. Thursday evening, I find myself staying late at the office, ostensibly to catch up on projects, but really because going home means confronting the loneliness that has settled over me like fog. When Adrian appears at my desk at 7:30, I look up to find him studying my face with the kind of attention that suggests he's been watching me withdraw as much as I've been watching him do the same. "This isn't working," he says without preamble. I save the document I've been pretending to edit and lean back in my chair. The office is nearly empty around us, just the cleaning crew moving through distant cubicles and the hum of computers left running overnight. "The pretending, you mean?" I ask. He nods. "The careful distance. Acting like nothing happened. Acting like I don't think about Tuesday night every time I look at you." The admission catches me off guard with its honesty, cutting through the polite professionalism we've been hiding behind. "I can't keep doing this," Adrian continues. "I can't keep pretending that I don't want to touch your hand when you're explaining something in meetings. I can't keep editing myself every time I want to tell you something personal. I can't keep compartmentalizing what I feel about you just because it's convenient." He sits on the edge of my desk, close enough that I can smell his cologne, and looks at me with the same vulnerable intensity he had in my apartment 2 nights ago. "I know there are risks," he says. "I know it's complicated. But I'd rather deal with complicated than keep pretending this doesn't matter to me." I look at him, taking in the determination in his expression, the way he's holding himself like someone who's made a decision and is prepared to live with the consequences. "What are you saying?" I ask. "I'm saying I don't want to hide this. I'm saying I want to figure out how to make this work without sacrificing what makes it worth having in the first place." The words settle between us like a challenge and a promise combined. Outside the windows, the city continues its evening routine, lights beginning to twinkle in office buildings and apartments, people making their way home to lives that suddenly seem simpler than ours. "I'm not ashamed of how I feel about you," I tell him, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I can't pretend it's just some joke anymore. Adrian's face transforms with relief and something deeper, something that looks like hope finally allowed to surface. "So what do we do?" he asks. "We figure it out together," I say. Slowly, carefully, but honestly. No more pretending it doesn't exist. He reaches for my hand then, right there in the office with its fluorescent lights and institutional carpet, and I let him take it because suddenly the risk feels less important than the truth. 3 weeks later, the office has settled into a new rhythm that somehow accommodates the truth Adrian and I decided to stop hiding. It wasn't the dramatic revelation I had imagined in my more anxious moments. No grand announcements or uncomfortable meetings with HR. Instead, it happened gradually, naturally, the way most real changes do when they're allowed to unfold at their own pace. Caroline was the first to know, not because we told her directly, but because she has the kind of observational skills that made her successful in this business. She noticed the way Adrian and I had begun collaborating more seamlessly, the easy shorthand that had developed between us, the particular quality of attention we gave each other during meetings. One afternoon, she simply asked if we were happy, and when we both said yes, she nodded and told us to keep doing good work. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like a benediction. Others in the office followed suit with varying degrees of subtlety. Marcus made a few jokes about office romances that landed somewhere between supportive and teasing. Jennifer from HR mentioned the company's non-discrimination policy in a way that felt protective rather than cautionary. Sarah from accounting started including both of us in her weekend dinner party invitations without making a big deal about it. The Morrison account loss turned out to be less catastrophic than we feared. Caroline secured 2 smaller clients within a month, and while the office budget remained tight, no one was laid off. Adrian's position felt secure enough that he could breathe easily again, could make plans that extended beyond the immediate future. Tonight, we're working late again, but this time it's by choice rather than necessity. The campaign we're developing for one of the new clients has taken on a creative momentum that neither of us wants to interrupt, even though it's past 8 and the office has emptied around us. We've ordered Chinese food and spread materials across the conference room table, laptops open, notebooks filled with sketches and copy variations. But the work feels secondary to the simple pleasure of being here together, of not having to carefully modulate our interactions or edit our conversations. When Adrian leans over to look at something on my screen, he rests his hand on my shoulder without thinking about it. When I reach for the soy sauce, my fingers brush his, and neither of us pulls away. These small intimacies, so ordinary they would be invisible in any other context, feel like quiet victories after weeks of careful distance and professional performance. Around 9:30, Adrian closes his laptop and stretches, rolling his shoulders in a way that suggests we've been hunched over our work for too long. "I think we've done enough for tonight," he says, looking at the spread of materials across the table. "This is good work. Really good." I save my documents and begin gathering my things, but there's no urgency in our movements. We're both reluctant to end this bubble of creative collaboration and easy companionship, to return to separate apartments and the ordinary evening routines that feel somehow less complete than they did before. "Ready?" Adrian asks, shouldering his messenger bag. We take the elevator down together, a descent that has become routine over the past few weeks, but still carries a charge of anticipation. The lobby is quiet, just the security guard reading a paperback novel behind his desk and the distant hum of traffic from the street outside. When we step onto the sidewalk, the October air has a crisp edge that promises real autumn is finally arriving. The streets are busy with the usual Thursday night energy. People heading to dinner, couples walking arm in arm, the flow of urban life that makes this city feel alive even in the quieter hours. We begin walking in the direction of my apartment, as has become our habit, but when we reach the corner where Adrian would normally turn toward the subway, he pauses. "Walk with me a little further?" he asks. I'm not ready to go underground yet. We continue down the street, past the restaurant where we had our first honest conversation, past the park where we eat lunch when the weather is decent, through the familiar geography of our shared routine. But tonight there's something different in the air between us, a sense of completion that feels both satisfying and bittersweet. 2 blocks from my building, Adrian stops walking. We're on a quiet side street lined with brownstones, their windows glowing warm yellow in the evening darkness. A few people pass by, but no one from work, no one who would recognize us or draw conclusions about why we're walking together at this hour. "I need to tell you something," Adrian says, turning to face me. The seriousness in his voice makes my stomach tighten with familiar anxiety, the fear that he's about to tell me this has all been a mistake, that the complications outweigh whatever we've built together. Instead, he steps closer, close enough that I can see the sincerity in his expression, the particular way his eyes soften when he's about to say something important. "I'm happy," he says simply. "Really happy. For the first time in longer than I can remember, everything in my life feels like it's pointing in the same direction." The words settle over me like warmth, dissolving the tension I didn't realize I was carrying. "Me too," I tell him, and mean it completely. Adrian smiles then, that unguarded expression that transforms his whole face, and without looking around to see who might be watching, he reaches for my hand. His fingers intertwine with mine easily, naturally, like this is something we've been doing for years rather than weeks. We walk the remaining 2 blocks in comfortable silence, our joined hands swinging slightly between us. When we reach my building, Adrian doesn't immediately let go. Instead, he squeezes my hand gently, a gesture that feels like both goodbye and promise. "This is real," he says, not quite a question. "This is real," I confirm. He kisses me then, soft and brief but completely unselfconscious, right there on the sidewalk under the streetlight in front of my building. When we separate, he's smiling with the kind of quiet joy that makes everything else fade into background noise. "I'll see you tomorrow," he says, releasing my hand reluctantly. "See you tomorrow," I reply, and watch him walk away toward the subway entrance, his figure gradually disappearing into the flow of evening pedestrians. I stand on the sidewalk for a moment longer, feeling the city move around me in its endless rhythm. The night air carries the promise of change, of seasons shifting and life continuing to unfold in ways I never could have predicted when I made that joke about office crushes 3 weeks ago. But some changes, I realize as I climb the steps to my building, are worth every moment of uncertainty they require. Some risks are worth taking, especially when they lead you towards something you never knew you were looking for, but recognize immediately as home.